To Libya now, where the rebels are tightening the noose around Colonel Gaddafi's last major stronghold, his hometown Sirte. The fugitive leader's forces have been given an extended deadline to surrender, which expires next Saturday. But in a defiant audio message aired by Syrian TV, Gaddafi rallied his supporters, urging them to fight on against the rebels and NATO. The alliance has vowed to continue its airstrikes on loyalist forces, saying the UN mandate to protect civilians in Libya still stands. The coalition's also moving to release billions of dollars of Gaddafi's frozen assets to fund the reconstruction of Libya. Well, we can now cross live to the US and talk to United Nations Special Rapporteur Richard Falk. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Now, the Libyan rebels abandoned non-violent measures against Gaddafi's regime early on, before the violence really did escalate. And now, of course, the country's flooded with weapons, often in the hands of people with a shady past. The NTC, the National Transitional Council, will have its hands full trying to build a democratic country, won't it?
No question. It's very problematic that the NTC can remain coherent in this period and not itself become the subject of a great deal of internal factionalism. And it's not clear who they will create a future Libya on behalf of. Will they give the NATO benefactors of their revolutionary challenge to the Gaddafi regime control over the oil industry? Will European construction companies really call the tune for economic reconstruction of the country? There are a lot of open questions that one has to be rather skeptical about how they will be resolved in this period.
Well, interesting you talking about perhaps referring to rewards. I noticed that we've been reporting, in fact, that there have been revelations in the French media suggesting that Paris has sealed an agreement with the rebels, giving France more than a third of Libya's oil reserves. Now, if that isn't a reward, then what is it? And if that is the case, doesn't that make Libya a puppet to the West?
Well, it certainly raises questions about the whole relationship of a supposedly humanitarian intervention in the internal affairs of the country and the economic dimensions of the undertaking that seem to explain why Libya and why not Syria, why not Bahrain, why not other places. So that you have to be a little bit suspicious about what the motivations were in Libya in the first place, what accounts for the use of force, what accounts for the failure to limit the action to what the UN Security Council authorized in terms of a no-fly zone and the protection of civilians, particularly in Benghazi. It was clear from the outset that this mission, as executed, had very little to do with the Security Council authorizing resolution that several important countries had abstained from in the first place because they were dubious about any use of force in relation to the situation within Libya. Okay,
then, what now then for the future? You raised doubts over the NATO role there, but what about the UN? You are a UN rapporteur. Is there a role now for the future in Libya for the UN to ensure that there are proper elections, that there is, in fact, a stable road to democracy? I was talking to a guest a little earlier from the Libyan Democratic Party, and he was saying the UN really should play a crucial role. Now, would that be acceptable to the Libyan people and indeed to the international community, where we're seeing further foreign interference and intervention in Libya's future?
Well, that's a question. It would depend on whether the initiative to invite the UN was an authentic expression of Libyan self-determination. What's really at stake here is whether the NTC really can fulfill its promise as the representative of the Libyan people and not the agent of international capital or of NATO or of external forces. And if that doesn't happen, then I think the doubts about the whole undertaking will only increase in the future. the UN has the potential to play a constructive monitoring and supervisory role in relation to human rights and democracy, the avoidance of revenge politics in this post-Gaddafi period. But whether that can happen in an acceptable way or not is anyone's guess at this stage.
But wouldn't that acceptable help or interference, whichever way you want to look at it, be more legitimate coming from the African Union? After all, we're talking about a country on the African continent here. Now, Gaddafi was very influential, of course, in Africa, but of course the African Union has been very reluctant, hasn't it, to accept the rebels as the legitimate authority in Libya. But isn't there more of a role here for the African Union than anyone else?
In one sense, yes. I mean, in the regional relationship that Libya had to the African Union and to Africa, one can certainly say that this would be a desirable kind of initiative, particularly in Africa, which has been so much the target of intervention over the years, so much exploited and abused by the European colonial powers, that it would be very important to allow Africans to have a major role in planning Libya's future. But the realities of geopolitics are such that now that NATO has engaged in this massive intervention, it's likely to prefer the UN, where it has a good deal of leverage, over the African Union, which is viewed as having had this close relationship with the Gaddafi regime and not fully trusted in this situation that is emerging in Libya at the present time.
OK, Richard, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks for your thoughts. Joining us live there from the US, United Nations Special Rapporteur Richard Falk. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.